haunting my Saturdays. So, you know, there you go.
I can relate to
Yes. Okay, well, I'll get cracking because I realise we haven't got a huge amount of time. So, hi everybody. I'd love to see you all. And my name is James, and I am the managing editor at Beat Media Group. I'm sure some of you may know some of the brands that we have, particularly News Associates, which is the leading journalism school in the UK, has been for the last 6 or 7 years. And we're really delighted to be the headline sponsor at your conference this year. Many of you, I think, probably would have joined Lucy at the free workshops, events, training, events, talks that she's held over the last 12 months. We've also had many previous SPA alumni come through our training. Also part of our group to news and sports agencies and also specialist consultancies in editorial strategy and social media. And we count the likes of Reach and NewsQuest and News UK and Sky and many others amongst our clients. And my job is to work with all of our brands with particular responsibility for what we call major event coverage, which could be anything from the forthcoming Tokyo Games, where I head for 7 weeks in a couple of months, through to election coverage. Thankfully got nothing to do with this current election, which is seeming to go on for weeks, and also COP26 later this year, maybe. And on social media, we provide strategy and we provide editorial delivery for a host of clients. Indeed, yesterday I finished the plan for our work with Team GB during the Olympics, which will involve a team of over 20 journalists, designers, social media producers, videographers, animators, working 24/7 from Tokyo and London, producing everything from text to graphics to a nightly live show that we're streaming on YouTube to a daily podcast. This presentation is broadly titled "You Are What You Retweet," and we're going to look at when social media goes bad, and also give you some tips, I guess, on how you should be approaching social. Lots of questions we get about that, both on your work on student media and also, probably as importantly, when you start to look at the job market. 50 minutes is a really short time to cover such a broad subject, and I want to leave some time for questions. However, I'll also going to tell you about a free opportunity that we're going to do later this year with Lucy, where student media editors can learn about the science, and it is a science really, of when and what and where you post on social, what we call a differentiated approach to drive engagement for the content you produce. We work really closely with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter and YouTube and TikTok, and they help us ensure that the content we produce and the clients we work for get the most from those channels. You also may know that News Associates work really closely with News UK, and we're currently involved in the recruitment of 12 journalism apprentices for the Sunday Times and the Times, and I'm involved in those interviews and those assessment centres, and I can give you probably some inside track on whether recruiters look at your social media presence, and as a spoiler alert, they do. Okay, so let's just start off with looking particularly at Twitter, because I think as a platform, Twitter, I sometimes think, look at my timeline, Twitter is just other journalists talking to each other. But we have this expression about journalism being the first draft of history, and Twitter is very much that first draft of journalism. And in an online world where we have lots of misinformation, trust is probably the most powerful weapon that we have for retaining our audiences and our advertisers, and also standing apart from the noise. For media companies and the companies that we work with, trust has never been more under siege, and they really are struggling without it to sustain the value of their brand, drive subscriptions, advertising revenues, all those things that are the lifeblood of those operations. Media companies have, over the years, earned their reputation through quality, truthfulness, speed, exclusivity of information that they provide, and distinguishing themselves from other online sources. But amid the flurry of sort of news and noise, that's becoming increasingly harder to do. Very quickly going to take you through some case studies, because actually I think one of the problems with fake news is the biggest people that are sometimes the perpetrators of those fake news are journalists, and I want to give you some examples of that. So first of all, I want to take you back, you're going back a few years to the Boston Marathon. You may remember the Boston Marathon bombing back in April 2013, and the first recorded tweet we had anywhere by anyone that night was of this guy here, Dlo_77, who is a semi-pro ice hockey player in New England, and not particularly punchy, but explosions in Boston. He broke the news. Didn't do it in a way I would do it, but he broke the news. I remember that night working on our news desk, we started seeing some information coming through social media long before it had been fact-checked and verified by any more recognized news source. Obviously, after the first source, there is a flurry of tweets, and it took a full 11 minutes before the first verified news source came with a confirmation that something had happened, and that was the Boston Globe. Now, that's good. That's exactly how social media should be working. I think as journalists, we now know it's very hard to be first with the information, especially on social. So we actually taking some time to fact check and verify is really sensible. After that, we have a slew of people talking about speculation, bomb near Harvard. There was never a bomb near Harvard. Harvard, always, whenever you have one of incidents like this, there's lots of people saying something's happening over here, something's happening over there. It's usually not true. We had a situation out the JFK Library, Presidential Library, out on the road to Cape Cod. There was a fire there, had nothing to do with the Boston Marathon, and yet USA Today is still tweeting about a third blast at the JFK Library. Absolutely not true. If you went back to 2013, most social media desks of most major news publications were managed by interns or people in their first jobs. No longer the case. I think used to be a view you could, if I'm going to put it in the newspaper, really got to be right, and if I'm going to put it online, probably got to be right, and if I'm going to put it on Twitter, shit, anything goes. Unfortunately, when you've got your brand above what you do, and a lot of people are consuming, 80% of people said that they consume their news first and foremost from social media, you have got to apply the same standards across all of those different platforms. So with Boston, here we had lots of speculation. Speculation is a very dangerous thing on social media. It can lose you your reputation very quickly. Paris Hilton is my go-to man for all things Kardashian, not necessarily for a terror alert happening on the side of the world. This journalist here was the former, and I stress former, NBC correspondent in Boston. Basically, both of them had seen a story that gathered speed on Reddit and put it onto their social media. That journalist, Cami, would never have gone on NBC and said it live down a camera. But she sort of thought, it's only Twitter, so anything goes. Pretty big thing to accuse someone of looking like a terrorist. Consequently, she did lose her job. Reputations in journalism are hard to win and incredibly easy to lose. Lots of speculation about arrests. News organisations thinking we've got to get something on social, we've got to be in it for the for the instant hit of likes and stuff like that, and then immediately being shot down by verified accounts. Often, by the way, on terror attacks, people go, always trust the police. You must trust what the police say. Don't listen to the journalists, trust the police. Always worries me a little bit like that. If we only trusted the police, what the police said over the Hillsborough disaster all those decades ago, we'd had a very different story. So I don't slavishly trust the police, but equally, we've got to be right. See, this is the thing that I would definitely, I've seen this on lots of student medias, lots of people I might follow, lots of journalists that I follow, will see a story develop and they will quickly hit like. So this is a story that came up. My heart aches for this little girl. She was running for Sandy Hook victims and lost her own life in the process. It's amazing the amount of people who just retweeted that without looking at it and thinking, when's the last time you saw a 5-year-old girl run a marathon? It just doesn't stack up. She's not running in a Boston Marathon kit. She's not got, it just doesn't true. It isn't true. And yet it's really easy to retweet something and then and almost verify it. If you've got journalist in your bio, it means something. It doesn't mean you need to apply a higher standard to this. I was amazed by the amount of journalists that just retweeted this picture idly. Moving on to Paris terror attacks. This is another classic one for your own use of social. Whenever there is a big story, someone digs back in the archive and finds an old tweet, re-promotes it, and you think it's just happened. So this Donald Trump tweet that happened was the Paris terror attacks, which happened in the Bataclan and other venues around Paris, you might remember. This Donald Trump tweet, a lot of people retweeting that as if he just said it. Actually, the truth was, look at the date. He said it on the 7th of January. He said it after the Charlie Hebdo attacks. It wasn't the same time. It means something. So if you're going to retweet something, I just think you need to think. You need to apply the same standard to it as you would be if you're putting it in your publication, you're putting it on your website. Twitter also is a classic one for calling you out. And journalists hate being called out usually, and we hate apologizing, and you will be called out if you get it wrong. And of course, it means that the next time you write a story or next time you push something on Twitter, people have got this ability not to believe it. This is a classic one. So this is a CNN correspondent, French media reporting that President Hollande has had a stroke. Massive story. President Hollande, obviously the sort of leader of France, big terror attack happening in Paris. what's happened there. So been tweeted by a journalist. So I'm thinking, where's this information come from? Track down the information, trying to find the original source. The original source was a website called Alman Shah. Unfortunately, I don't speak the language, but I do have Google Translate. So sticking that into Google Translate, I can find out really quickly that despite the site looking like an official news site, it is a satire site. And yet that story was retweeted. It found its way onto the blog of The Guardian, unbelievably. So you've got to be really, really careful in a big breaking news story like this. Hopefully everyone knows how to Google image reverse search. So when you see a picture come up on Twitter and you think, oh, this is remarkable, there's a protest happening in Paris right now, run the image through Google image search and you can find out whether that image has appeared anywhere before. This didn't happen that night. That is an anti-fascism march that happened in Berlin several weeks before the Paris terror attack. The people will remember the migrant camp in the jungle. There was a fire in the jungle that night. It had nothing to do with the attacks in Paris. By the way, there were quite regularly fires in the Calais jungle. If anyone ever went there and ever covered any stories there, it's because they didn't have health and safety certificates for their electricity. So there were quite regularly fires. Had absolutely nothing to do with retaliating for Paris terror attacks. I also believe a Twitter account that's Area 82 @surveillance911 is not one to be believed. And yet, amazingly, this tweet found its way onto 5 breaking news blogs of 5 UK national newspapers. It really matters because by doing that, we're just fueling this fake news story. Always get these stories whenever there is a major incident, people who happen to be, maybe, should be, look a little bit like maybe one of the perpetrators. Banksy, by the way, doesn't have a Twitter account, and yet I saw this being shared. But I almost don't mind my mum sharing this, by the way. I'm okay with my mum sharing this, not that my mum is on Twitter, but I do care when a journalist shares it because I think, why are you fueling this particular fire? Empire State Building, let up in the colours of the French flag. Never happened. Didn't happen that night. Had happened several months previously, but didn't happen that night. Eiffel Tower, this is on Fox News. The lights going dark in memory of the victims of the Paris terror attack. The lights didn't go dark in anyone's memory. The lights just went dark because they turn the lights off. They do it every night. And this picture, not afraid, Paris right now, truly remarkable. Well, actually, that happened months and months before, after the Charlie Hebdo attack. And yet, look at that, 33,000 retweets, 44,000 likes. And if you're going to work on broadcast, always make sure you get the right flag, by the way. The problem is with breaking stories is they happen at such a pace, you feel like you want to be involved in them. And the best way to be involved in them is to do that on social. And yet, time and time again, wrong stories take flight because journalists have verified them by retweeting them. This was back in, I saw this, so several very high profile, very respected journalists decided that this was a hilarious thing to retweet during Donald Trump's inaugural address, which is comparing his inaugural address to Barry B. Benson in B Movie, which is a very underrated flick for those of you who haven't seen B Movie. But here we've got Donald Trump's address, Barry B. Benson's address, and the amount of people, including journalists, who saw this and just hit retweet, like, isn't Donald Trump an idiot? I'm thinking, no, well, he is an idiot, but you're a bigger idiot. Because look at this. This is something that looks like someone's sort of knocked up in paint. If it was true, we would have audio, we would have video, we would be able to verify it. Just not true. And stuff like this, which took fly after Donald Trump had been elected, a quote that he just never said. And yet the amount of people that retweeted it. We're seeing it all the time. Might remember the story last year from Woolworths. So this was a young chap who'd set up a UK Woolworths Twitter account and had tweeted this. And then, amazingly, here we find it running across many of our news outlets. So most news organizations, including ones that we work with now, employ people that they call trends writers. And what a trend writer largely does is look at what is popping on social and writes a story about it. So if there's a story that's taking off on social, all right, we'll do a story on that because that's going to be incredibly good for search. So the tweet was put out there about Woolworths. They thought, God, that's going crazy. It's got 30,000 likes. We'll do a story about it. Actually, if they'd have made a phone call to the company that bought the brand name Woolworths after the stores went into administration, they would have shut it down straight away. So credit to the many news organizations that saw it and thought, that doesn't sound true, and a bit of a boo to those that fell for it. And then we had this. This made me so angry, because the amount of people, really respected journalists who I know, saw this and followed it. So Sunday afternoon, I started seeing this story a couple of months ago appearing across the media. And this is in the Indie. It was in the London Economic. It was on the Express. It was in the Sun, and it was this quote. So here is his name was Sean Coomer, and apparently he was in Malaga Airport, and I voted out, but I didn't realise I would come to this. My application for staying in Spain has been rejected, and on the way home, I'm in tears. She's distraught. I'm not happy about having to return to the UK. And of course, many people who hate the idea of Brexit jumped on this immediately and went, "Oh God, what an idiot! What an absolute moron for doing that!" And this is what's happened. And I looked at this and thought, why is this quote appearing in all of these news organisations? Why is it appearing in our national papers? Why is it making its way online? Why am I seeing it across my timeline? Brian Moore, who is a pretty successful former rugby player, now a pundit, there you go, tweeted all about it. 8.5 thousand retweets, nearly 56,000 likes. Jeremy Vine, who you think might know better as a journalist who worked on Newsnight and Panorama, again tweeted it, fueling the fire of this story without actually ever looking about what was in the story. And loads of journalists that I follow, loads of our trainees that I follow at News Associates, just jumped on this bandwagon of this idiotic guy, Sean Coomer, who was being deported from Spain because of Brexit that he voted for. I would rather think, okay, let's just dig behind that. So where's the story come from? It doesn't take long to find that this is the source of the story. It's global247news.com. Now, I've never heard of global247news.com. So let's have a look at the website. The website launched just by taking some time. The website launched in March 2020. Not many global news websites were launching in March 2020. So that rang a bit of an alarm bell with me. They only have less than 3,000 followers on social media, which is even less than me. So that's a problem straight away. And then I start looking at some of the journalists who write stories on their website, like Maria Rosalo and Pedro Martinez and Marsh Hemmings. I think, why are none of these journalists on Twitter? Why are none of these journalists on LinkedIn? That's weird. We're all on Twitter and we're all on LinkedIn, and their entire staff don't have anyone on any of those platforms. And then I have a look at the website, and in one of the stories, there's the chief executive, probably probably quite a grand title, talking about his own website. It may not be to everyone's taste, but the important factor is it attracts traffic, and all that traffic could be potential customers for your business. It's just nonsense. And unfortunately, by retweeting it, we are verifying it. So we've got to be really, really, really careful. And I look really extensively, if it's someone we're going to hire or it's someone going through a graduate scheme, about what they retweet. I'm as interested in what they retweet and what they like as what they post. And those are a few sort of danger signs. So a few sort of do's and don'ts. Now, what I guess you guys want to know is how you should use social media to stand out, how you should stand out from the crowd. And it's a really great tool. I think it's, to some extent, a lot of journalists are stepping back from Twitter. There's a number of reasons for that. It could be the abuse that they receive. I always feel incredibly sorry for some of our trainees who might go and start work at a newspaper who many people don't maybe like that newspaper, whether it's the Sun or the Mail, and just get an incredible pile on for the story we did. I actually you probably saw the story at the weekend about a journalist who had made a very polite, perfectly appropriate inquiry to the PR person for Laura Whitmore, and Whitmore had retweeted it, encouraging a huge pile on to this young journalist who was only doing her job and actually was being really professional in how she did it. So lots of journalists are cutting back on their use of Twitter. And the other thing that we have increasingly found, that most news organizations organisations are now regulating their staff's use of Twitter. And we've actually had some involvement in helping some of those guidelines being written. So the BBC have totally issued a new set of guidelines for all of their correspondents, all of their journalists, about what they can and can't do on social media. And exactly the same has happened at the New York Times. And this is happening across a sort of range of news outlets. You will know that it doesn't matter how old a tweet is, it can come back to bite you. This is a really interesting example of the appointed editor of Teen Vogue, who had tweeted something that was inappropriate 10 years previously to her appointment at Teen Vogue, and in the end lost her job. So something that you do now absolutely could bite you coming down the road. And by the way, I make no apology for that, because as journalists, we are always digging through the timelines. I mean, we had journalists digging through the timelines of Brexit candidates' Twitter for weeks, trying to find something embarrassing that they had said or something inappropriate they'd said. We didn't actually have to look back very far to find it, to be honest. So what I would say about this is that it's the game that we play. And then on a sort of another example, and I know this chap really well, Liam, who had long dreamed of being a Premier League football writer, and got a job working for the Sunderland Echo when Sunderland were a Premier League team. Some fans of Sunderland dug back through his Twitter timeline over 6 years and found some really pretty ripe stuff that he'd written about Sunderland, because he's a massive fan of Newcastle. And if you know Sunderland and Newcastle, they're a bit like oil and water. They don't get on. Consequently, he actually ended up losing his job as a Sunderland reporter. So he's got to be really, really careful. What I don't want to do is scare you so much that you don't tweet at all. But I think it's about caution and being, and just making sure that you get it right, basically. So first of all, I'm going to come on to is I'm going to talk about your profile pictures. So the first thing I would say is, and when I'm looking, I want you to have the most professional looking profile picture that you can get. Really easy to get one of you with all your mates, you at the rugby chugging the pints, you sort of, surrounded by your family. It should just be a picture of you. I want you to imagine that you suddenly find yourself in the middle of a breaking news story that you're reporting on your social platform. What picture do you want Sky News to use if they're going to take you seriously? So first of all, make it a picture of you. That's the best advice. Make sure your placeholder is incredibly neutral. In terms of your user handle, try to make it your name. It's the best thing to be, or a version of your name. These are three former News Associates trainees, and this is their profile that they previously had. I'm sure they don't have this profile anymore. Tom Roddy is now at the Times, Leone is at HuffPost, Sam Meadows is at the Telegraph. But I think these are okay. There's a few words in here I would list out. But first of all, a picture that's just of you. Also, by the way, don't make it a picture of you graduating. It's a proud day. And your parents and your grandparents have got the photo and it's on the mantelpiece, but it ages you. It automatically makes you look young. So if you're trying to secure an interview with a politician, they've never heard of you. Of course, they're going to check you out on social media. If you called me and said, "Can I speak to you?" I'm going to check you out. That's what we do, isn't it? We use social media to stalk people. That's what it's about. So don't do that. Don't do anything that ages yourself. Another way you could potentially age yourself, and a lot of people do this, is that they put the year of their birth in their Twitter handle. So it's XYZ 2000 or whatever it happens to be. So don't put the year of your. Notice I didn't put the year of my birth in my Twitter handle because that would have been embarrassing. But don't put your year of your birth in your Twitter handle. Keep it all nice and neutral. That would be the way to go. Other thing, if you're going to have a link, obviously you can put a link in your Twitter handle. I always love to see people who've done two things: either a link to their own blog or a link to a page that they have on Journalisted. So you might know a little bit about Journalisted. It's a site where you can curate lots of links. I wouldn't, if you've done 2 weeks work experience at the Times, don't put a link to the Times website. If you're leading the sort of the news team at the Boar, then would you want to send it back to the Boar, or would you want the potential employer to have a look at content that you've produced? So how do you know what that particular website is going to look at the point that your prospective employer looks at it? So first of all, a few things. You're a journalist. You are not a student journalist and you are not a trainee journalist. Those are two words, trainee and student, that I would drop from your bio. I just don't think you need them. You're in the job of journalism, so say you're a journalist. It also means that people sometimes don't take you as seriously, don't maybe give you that access to the event, don't let you do that interview. Oh, it's just, they're just the student journalist. And by the way, I love student media and I love my time in student media. So you know, I don't think that at all, but I know PRs might think that. So just don't do that. As I said, don't age yourself. Don't put your date of birth, year of birth in your Twitter handle. We tend to avoid numbers, by the way, in Twitter handles. Bit of good advice. Underscores really as well. I still can't work out what the underscore is on my Mac, so I have to go around trying to find it. And so it's always a bit frustrating on a Twitter handle. Don't claim to be something that you aren't. This happens quite a bit, and I've seen this particularly when people are applying for jobs. So they'll say that they are a journalist at the Telegraph, and you're thinking, are you? Or have you just done a few stories or one story there? Or have you just done 2 weeks work experience? And if you dig behind it and you find out they're not a journalist at the Telegraph, it really undermines everything that they do. So, you know, it's absolutely fine to say journalist, freelance journalist, or words in, and then list the places where you may have had content. But don't try to pass yourself off as a staff reporter. Staff reporters work really hard to become staff reporters. They don't particularly like people coming in and saying they are when they're not. Journalism is an incredibly small world. And so the other thing I'm going to sort of advise people to do, and a lot of people do this and it's frustrating, is I tend to try to avoid what we would call spitting in the soup, which is it's really easy to slag off that story or that picture, use of that picture, or that headline that you didn't like, or that newspaper that never in a million years would you work for. However, the person you're going for a job with, you might well find out that their partner, their best friend, or even them used to work at that publication. This is incredibly small world. So I don't take really kindly to people. Journalists have enough stuff chucked at us, and a lot of that, by the way, that we deserve. But I don't take kindly to other journalists sort of fueling the fire. So if you've seen a headline that you don't like, or a typo in a story that makes it look stupid, you've got to think a little bit there, but for the grace of God, go I, because something like that's going to happen to you in the future. And I know it's incredibly off-putting for employers to see aspiring journalists having a pop at other journalists. The thing that we often also find a lot is people tweet a lot, and they've got an opinion on everything, whether it is the rules of tennis, whether it is the electoral college, whether it is, you know, latest on epidemiology, even though they did that humanities degree. They seem to think, I have to tweet, I have to be tweeting. And actually, I would say you don't. And it is almost, I know, having sat down and looked at social profiles of people applying for jobs, that it is almost incredibly off-putting to see that person who's tweeted 25 times a day, because you're thinking, well, when you're working, when you're coming up with stories. Now, Twitter is an incredibly valuable platform for, or social media is an incredibly valuable platform for getting more people to see our journalists. The work that Savia Smith-Gala is doing on TikTok, absolutely brilliant. She's actually taken that platform. She's got an audience that is majority women aged between 18 and 24, and it's a really great entry point for news. So she's doing some really good stuff. Or if it hadn't been for Dianella Fraser taking the video footage of the murder of George Floyd, maybe that story never would have been taken. So, you know, so I'm not saying social media is bad, but do you have to tweet about everything? Do you have to have a view on everything? And that, by the way, includes politics. And you might also take the view that you're a big fan of a football team or a cricket team, and you want to just tweet incessantly about that. I suppose a disclaimer, I always tweet incessantly about Eurovision. It's my favorite night of the year. But but I don't think you have to have a view on everything. And I think that what we're saying to people is less is more. You know, actually, you don't need to tweet about every single issue that comes up. So think about your profile, think about your picture, think about your profile name, link to somewhere. By the way, if you're going to link to your blog, don't make it that blog that you set up 3 years ago because you were really into it and you posted 4 times in 4 days and then you just left it for a year. Tweet what you know about. So that for you, it could be, student politics, or it could be the area where you live, or it could be a specialism that you have. Cite your sources. Obviously be careful what you retweet, but also increasingly be careful what you like. I think, people sometimes forget, I'm sure everyone on here is more educated, but people sometimes forget that a like is actually the same as a retweet with the way that Twitter's algorithm works. And I never cease to be amazed by seeing a like come up on my timeline and going, why did that person like that? And several times I've had to actually email colleagues and say, did you want the world to see this? And they've come back and gone, oh no, I was only bookmarking it for the future. I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't look like that because the word used is like. So actually for anyone else, it makes it look like you did like it. Twitter's a great platform for sharing content that you produce. Links to stories always do better. High performing tweets always include a picture and a URL, all things that you can do. So sort of to cap off really, I think in social media posts, what we're going to try to do is try not to express those partisan opinions. I absolutely know when I'm looking at a social post of someone who's looking for a job here, or maybe applying for one of our training schemes, or maybe applying for one of the apprenticeships that we run with different publishers, partisan opinions tend to be pretty off-putting wherever they are. We had a trainee who went out in the general election 2 or 3 years ago, and she went out with Owen Jones doing a doorstop around a constituency with a Labour MP, and she shared a picture of her on Twitter, stood next to Owen Jones, and she'd put a Labour badge on. You just can't do stuff like that, and you cannot be seen to endorse candidates. You need to be mindful of taking sides on issues that your news organization is trying to cover objectively. And I also think it applies to every area of the newsroom. So if you're a sports journalist and you've got a strong view about something happening in politics, then it's the same. That said, clearly there's a line there, because otherwise you'll never tweet anything. So, can we all agree that Lawrence Fox is a bit of a busted flush with his London mayoral campaign polling at just under 2%? I think we can. But would I be getting involved in what Sadiq Khan and Sean Bailey are doing? Probably not, although it's by far not an open race in any way, shape or form. It was interesting when Donald Trump obviously was a president who lived and died very much by what happened on social media. And what the New York Times said to their staff is, unfortunately, the White House doesn't make a distinction in a tweet that the New York Times puts on their official platform and a tweet that a New York Times journalist says, even if it's posted by someone who doesn't cover him. So, we need to consider all social media, also all journalists' social media to come under this sort of same umbrella, really. And you may think that things like Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, Snapchat, etc., are private zones and they're separate from your job. But in the likelihood, everything that you post is to some degree public. And I think that's why increasingly we're trying to tell journalists, just be really careful about what you post. The other thing, a couple of pet hates: don't make customer service complaints on social media. You're on that train and it's been there on the station and you're waiting to go somewhere, and you might believe fully that you have a legitimate gripe, but why should you think that you'll be given more special consideration because of your status as a journalist or an editor? You simply shouldn't. I'm spending a lot of time telling journalists, I don't care your train was late. I don't care that your shopping from Waitrose arrived on the wrong day. It doesn't matter. Don't use your Twitter platform to do that. The balancing act here certainly is you have got to, absolutely, I'm not saying never do anything, but you've just got to think about what you post. And just as importantly, don't feel like you have to have a view on every single news story in the world, because it can look a bit chaotic if you're suddenly tweeted about the calamity that's unfolding on India, then what's going on with the Champions League match and should it be moved from Istanbul, and then, well, this is really exciting, this West Midlands mayoral race, and can Liam Byrne get across the line and beat Andy Street, and oh, by the way, this is really exciting, it's happening on Love Island tonight. It looks mad. So less is more on what you post, and absolutely, if you're applying for a job, your social media will be looked at. I'm not saying someone's going to go back and scroll through it for years, but they will absolutely take a flavor of what you're posting, what you're retweeting, and what you're liking. And so, you wouldn't send off your portfolio or your CV with anything in it that's likely to offend. Spelling mistakes, controversial opinions. Don't do the same on social media, because it can really, really let you down. There's a whole different element on talking about when you post and how you should post. So this is a session that we're going to do. I think she can just nod along. We've done several sessions for student media. We did one last year on journalism ethics, which was really good with our deputy managing editor and myself. But this is going to be talking about when you should be posting for social media engagement on your own channels. It's a really interesting space about why we should be posting 3-minute plus videos on YouTube. Why actually, although you can get 100 and whatever it is, 200 plus characters on a Twitter message, actually we've found increasingly the sweet spot for engagement is 80 characters. When you post it, when's your golden hour? When's your sweet spot? When's the best time of the day to do it? When's the worst time of day to do it? When you should be using live video, when you shouldn't be using live video. We're going to do a whole session on that this October. Hopefully it'll be really useful for people in leadership jobs on student papers who are just starting. I think if you're in that role in your student paper, the most important person you can appoint, by the way, is your head of social. I'm going to run that in October. A lot of people will know Lucy, but her email address is on the screen there. And if you want to ask her any questions about that or just register an interest, then drop her a note. Otherwise, that is me, and I will take any questions that you have. I'll race through that very quickly, but I knew I had limited time.
Yeah, so we'll race through it quickly. So first of all, so if you've got like a super common name, like what's a good idea for like a memorable social media handle and like email or username?
I hear it. I mean, a lot of journalists might use by John Smith or by Jane Smith or Jane Smith Journal or something like that. I think something that's just new. I want you to imagine that you were out for a walk and you saw a helicopter crash and you took your phone out and you took that video. What do you want your username to be on Sky News? So it's something that just needs to be super professional, and actually it should always be your name. So I had a long conversation, Leonie, whose Twitter handle I showed there, her previous Twitter handle that she started when she came to work with us was A Vagina with a View, which was her name of her blog. She's great. But I said, that's fine, but it doesn't look professional enough for someone who wants to move into a news reporting role. And so she goes, what should I change it to? I said, well, change it to your name. So yeah, I understand it, but I think trying to stick to your name where you can. I've seen the chat actually about Muckrack, which is a really good example of journalisted as well. So that's a really good one. Creating a journalist portfolio site is quite a good shout as well, I think. The most important thing is you want your link to take a prospective employer or maybe someone who you've asked for an interview with to somewhere where they can see you're serious.
Yeah, and we've got a question about sort of like boundaries on social media. So like, what do you think about tagging someone to get them to follow you for a DM or an interview? Like, is that too much?
It's a really tough one. Some people you can only contact on social media. So, if you're covering a story that's unfolding, and let's just say it is a helicopter crash and someone's tweeted about it and you're sat in your newsroom, the only way you can contact them for an interview is to probably DM them. I tend to not like people doing very public messages about stories that they're trying to chase down. I have the view that journalism is a bit like sausages. I like sausages, but I don't like seeing how they're made. Also, it really flags to your rivals stories that you're looking for. In fact, I've got a colleague of mine who I saw did something exactly the other day. trying to get hold of somebody, and that was someone I was also trying to get hold of the story, and I'm thinking, well, why is she doing it? And that's so actually sometimes there's no way around it. I think it depends on what the story is as well. If it's a nice sort of, not non-controversial story and you've tagged in the person that you've written about, then maybe they will retweet it. But I also think if you've just interviewed a British, someone who's been selected for the Paralympics, great story about, they've been selected to the Paralympics, fine to tag them in. But if you're just doing a story where, you're basically saying someone is terrible at their job or incompetent, don't tag them in. It's not a good look.
Yeah, so thank you so much, James, for that presentation. It was really interesting. I definitely learned a lot about my own social media. And so we've got a couple of sessions for you guys to pick out next at 4 o'clock, media law Q&A with the expert David Banks, or with BBC's Mariana Spring. You can talk about disinformation in the media. And thanks again, guys, and definitely check out some of the training sessions the associates are doing. And Lucy's helpfully put a link in the chat, and her Twitter is @LucyEDyer. Is there a way people can get in contact with you, James, or?
Yeah, so my Twitter is jtoney, Toney. I'm really particular about the E, by the way. jtoney, Toney, S-beat. So jtoney, Toney, S-beat. And that's my Twitter. So that's probably a good enough, considering we're talking about social media, good enough place to start. Yeah.
Well, enjoy the Eurovision tonight, and
it's actually 3 weeks away. I'm counting the days. Just 21 days.
Just 21 days and a few hours. But thanks again, everyone, and hopefully see you soon.
Cheers.
Okay, bye-bye.